At this point, I've worn the Matilda dress out multiple times, and let me tell you, it is chef's kiss beautiful. But there are some pitfalls, so let's talk about them. The first issue I noticed is that the straps didn't want to stay on my shoulders when I was sitting down. I played around with the adjustable straps until they felt like they were going to stay properly, then when I stood up, it felt too tight. After wearing the dress all day, I just determined that the strap placement could be better, and I needed to move them inward so that they'd be comfortable for my body. Now, let me preface this by saying all bodies are different, so my needs may not be your needs, but this is just something that you can think about if you're going to be making the dress. I plan to align the straps with the seams on the front panels. This is probably about half an inch inward from the recommended place, and then I'm also going to move the straps in on the back side with the same distance. When you sew the dress, I recommend pinning the straps in place and trying it on. Make sure that you relax your shoulders and you try it both standing up and sitting down so that you can find the best placement for your body. Another issue that I noticed was with the side seam. Because there's so much volume to the skirt, you're working with a lot of fabric. If the fabric is hanging off the table, it can be really heavy and it can add tension to your seam. This happened to one of the side seams on my skirt, so it ripples a little bit and doesn't lay quite properly. So when you're sewing the skirt, make sure that you're managing the fabric accordingly and try putting the bulk of the fabric on top of the table so that nothing is weighing down on your seam. Now, in the pattern directions, it does say to put the interfacing on the lining, which is the piece that's closest to your body. But I chose to put the interfacing on the front panel because I thought it would make the sewing easier. And although it did make the sewing process easier, this isn't something that I would recommend. The interfacing caused a bit of puckering right in that front seam, and it wouldn't be a problem if it was on the interior, but because you see it on the front, it's just not as flattering. It's truly not a big deal, and I don't think it's anything that anyone else would notice, but it's definitely something that I noticed, so keep that in mind when you're sewing your dress. I'm 5'5", and I did want the dress to be completely floor length. When cutting out my skirt panels, I chose to add 4 extra inches of length, and I'm really glad that I did, because if I hadn't, it just wouldn't have ended up being the length that I wanted it to. So if you're on the taller side, maybe take that into consideration depending on the length that you want for your dress. Remember when I talked about the straps earlier? Well, I would definitely recommend that you use the sliders. This is a step you might consider skipping because it's easier, but I wouldn't recommend doing that. As I said before, it's really hard to tell if it's too tight or too loose depending on if you're standing or you're sitting or the weight of your skirt before you actually put it on. You just don't really know until the final dress is on your body. So with that being said, put in the extra work, put on the sliders, and you'll thank me later. Now here's a quick tip for sewing the invisible zipper. Once you've sewn on one side of the invisible zipper, push the zipper all the way to the top and place pins where the seams match up. This will help ensure that when you pin on the other side, everything matches up after sewing it down. It can be a huge bummer once you finish an entire zipper and then you zip it all the way to the top and it doesn't match up and it's not pleasing to the eye. Putting these pins in place will ensure that you have a beautiful zipper and you only had to do it once. Another tip you might consider is not gathering your skirt all the way to the very end. On either side where the zipper is going to go into place, I recommend leaving about an inch or half of an inch that's completely ungathered. If you push your gathers all the way to the end, it can make sewing the zipper more difficult, and leaving that extra bit of ungathered fabric will also make everything look a lot more clean. I made the mistake of gathering too far on my toile and it doesn't look quite perfect in the zipper area, so I took this into consideration when making my final dress and I'm so happy that I did. Now here's a bonus tip that's going to work for any project that involves a zipper. If you've sewn a zipper before, you probably know that at some point you have to stop, lift your presser foot, and try to push the zipper all the way under the presser foot. This can be super difficult and take a ton of time, and it always makes me feel like I just want to give up. But a super easy solution is just to stop before the zipper pull, backstitch, and take your garment all the way out from under your sewing machine, snip off those threads, pull the zipper up, put it back under your sewing machine, and finish the seam. That way you don't have to fiddle at all with trying to push the zipper underneath your presser foot. Now, since we're talking about zippers, when I went out to look for material for my Matilda dress, I couldn't find a matching zipper in the size that the pattern recommended. If this happens to you, don't be afraid of buying a longer zipper and then making it shorter. Shortening an invisible zipper is super easy. All you have to do is figure out where you want your zipper to stop and hand sew a whip stitch into place. It only takes a minute or so, and then you can tie it off and cut off the excess zipper. Once you've made your cut, I recommend taking a lighter to the zipper and melting the edge to prevent it from fraying. Believe it or not, the lighter is actually an essential tool in my sewing studio. I use the lighter all the time, and in fact, I also used it at the edge of the straps for the Matilda dress. This made the insertion of the strap into the sliders so much easier. Now that you've gotten all my best tips for sewing the Matilda dress, head over to my tutorial and sew away.